The story kicks off in total chaos, with the city getting wrecked and people losing their minds. In the middle of all this, we see our protagonist, who senses the danger and thinks he's got to move fast. But actually, he's just out on his balcony complaining that his coffee needs more sugar. Meanwhile, in his online game, his teammates start freaking out, saying they just saw on the news that people are turning into zombies. But our hero couldn't care less about the apocalypse. He's just complaining about how much his teammates suck. He then asks one of them if his girlfriend is around, saying she's about to take a bite out of him. The teammate is shocked and asks how he knew that, confirming that his girlfriend is literally biting him right now. He then looks down and asks his girlfriend why she stopped what she was doing. But suddenly, the woman turns into some bizarre creature. Even with the cries for help, our main character just ignores him and tells him to focus on taking the enemy tower. And after a few moments, he finally wins the match and celebrates that the team wasn't full of noobs this time. Someone then knocks on the door, calling out his name, Lin Fan, and says it's his neighbor. He opens the door and sees his desperate neighbor, saying there's a bunch of crazies outside. Lin Fan agrees to help the woman, but first he asks her to close her eyes. The neighbor gets all excited and says she'll do anything he asks if he helps her. Lin Fan then stabs her, and looking down at her on the floor, he says he helped her, and that now she won't turn into a people-eating monster. Just then, a system screen pops up in front of him, showing he got 1 point for defeating the zombie. He then explains that he's not some chosen one or anything like that. He was just a regular architect. But because of an accident, he got dragged into this whole apocalypse mess. In a flashback, we see that he tried to help his neighbor, but she turned into a monster and attacked him. And just as he was about to get got, a survival system finally awakened. And just like that, he was reborn, and a screen appeared showing his stats. Then he realizes the point was a reward from the system for taking out the zombie. Suddenly, another creature shows up and starts chowing down on the protagonist's neighbor's body. The monster then turns and faces Lin Fan, who remains calm, not showing any reaction. The creature then lunges at our protagonist, trying to attack him, but Lin Fan just lops its head off. He then looks at the neighbor's body and thinks he can't just leave her there, or it'll attract more zombies. A little while later, our boy is exhausted after taking out several zombies that had invaded the building. He notices something strange and wonders where his neighbor's body went, and he concludes that she was probably completely eaten by the zombies. Looking at the pile of bodies, he says it's definitely going to start stinking if they're left scattered around, so like a good tenant, he better clean up properly. To solve the problem, the protagonist ties all the bodies together with a rope, and then he starts dragging them down the hallway, but halfway down he hears a weird noise and stops to see what it is. That's when Lin Fan sees the shadow of someone in a wheelchair coming toward him. The figure reveals itself to be a bizarre zombie with multiple eyes on its head and a tentacle mouth. The zombie then tries to attack the protagonist, but he wastes no time and slices its head off, asking how his neighbor Uncle Zhang got all the way up to the 7th floor. After finishing off the zombie, he thanks him, since the uncle came all this way just to bring him a wheelchair. He then throws the pile of bodies into the chair and says it would have been a pain to drag all that by himself. After that, he leaves the wheelchair in front of Uncle Zhang's apartment as a sign of respect. Outside, he thinks that even though it's hard to believe, the world really is over, and he wonders if this is wet waste or recyclable, and complains about living alone because he has no one to help him. Suddenly, he notices something and looks back. That's when he sees a man on a balcony and recognizes him as Uncle Joe's son. The bald guy was waving with a forced smile on his face. Lin Fan remembers that in the past, this same guy stole his bike and beat him up, so he asks his neighbor if there's a problem. The bald guy gets spooked and thinks the kid's gonna attract zombies by shouting like that, but then he concludes it's a good thing Lin Fan is an idiot, so that he can take advantage of him. After that, the bald guy holds up a sign asking the protagonist to get him food and drinks, but without a second thought, he shuts the request down. The bald guy gets annoyed with the response, and shows another sign saying he knows about a secret base and will take him along if he helps. But Lin Fan rejects the offer again. The man gets furious at his audacity and crumples the paper in anger, and then starts screaming that since the kid wants to get himself off, he'll grant his wish. But despite the threats, our boy stays cool as a cucumber. With the bald guys shouting, a bunch of zombies were attracted and ran toward the protagonist. The neighbor then starts mocking him, saying that Lin Fan was so scared he couldn't even run. But our protagonist easily takes down all the zombies and racks up a ton of system points. The bald guy is stunned and can't believe the kid is that strong. He then tries to play it cool and says that even though Lin Fan has some skills, there's still one zombie left. At that, the protagonist agrees there's still one left, while carrying the monster on his back, and without a second thought, he yeets the zombie toward his neighbor. The bald guy freaks out when he sees the creature flying in his direction. The monster then lands right in his arms, and he pretty much knows he's done for. Meanwhile, Lin Fan grabs his bike and says goodbye, telling the bald guy to ask the zombie whatever he wants. After leaving, he heads to a supermarket and earns another point on the way. Arriving there, he takes out a few more zombies and tells the zombie cashier he'll be taking everything. With the supplies, he thinks he needs a place to plant the seeds he grabbed. Suddenly, our hero hears a strange noise and gets on alert. Looking at the street, he sees a bus approaching and wonders where it came from. The sound of the bus engine ends up attracting a horde of zombies, Then the vehicle stops right in front of our confused protagonist. The bright headlights blind him for a moment as he tries to figure out what's going on. In a flashback, a woman complains about a child and asks when they're going to get rid of her. In the back seat, a little boy cries, hugging his bear, and wonders if he's been abandoned. The woman gets annoyed with the crying and yells at the boy, threatening to hit him. She gets so furious she tries to grab the steering wheel to stop and teach the kid a lesson. The couple's fight continues in the front seat while the boy watches, terrified. The boy then notices something coming toward them, and the car ends up slamming right into the bus. Back in the present, someone on the bus asks Lin Fan if he wants to get in. The guy then mocks him, saying if he doesn't, he'll become zombie chow. But our hero just stands there silently, holding his knife. Inside the bus, a guy with glasses asks if they're really not going to help the kid outside. The other guy gets angry and attacks the kid with glasses, saying that in the apocalypse, he does whatever he wants. And he says that without the professor around, all the good little students are his to mess with now, and that he'll be generous and send the nerd to keep the professor company. And without a second thought, he throws the guy out of the bus. But through the rearview mirror, the driver notices that Lin Fan is still standing in the middle of the street without moving. He then mocks the protagonist for carrying a kitchen knife and calls him a complete idiot. But our hero states with total confidence that he's not going to be the one to fall here. At that moment, he has a flashback of his mother telling him to be a good, brave, and kind boy. And remembering the promise he made, he readies his knife to strike. With all his strength, the young man hurls the blade toward the bus. The knife flies with pinpoint accuracy and hits one of the tires dead on. Because of this, the bus loses control and crashes. The bully, now on the ground and all banged up, starts begging for help, saying he doesn't want to go. When Lin Fan approaches, the guy gets desperate and apologizes, saying he was wrong while pleading to be saved. But the protagonist tells him he wasn't wrong. He was just scared of biting the dust. With a smile, he tells him his zombie pals came looking for him and that he'll leave them to it. The guy screams in desperation, begging for help, not understanding what the protagonist was talking about. Then the kid with glasses he threw off the bus appears before him, turned into a zombie. At that, the horde of zombies he attracted finally catches up to the bus and starts feasting on everyone. Meanwhile, our protagonist calmly continues on his way, and we see his stats have gone up a lot. Suddenly, he's interrupted by a woman in a building window who tells him to wait. The woman is surprised and wonders how the guy managed to cross the street full of zombies. The protagonist stops and asks what she wants, thinking that the little girl looks hungry. Up in the apartment, the mother kneels and begs for a little food for her daughter. Lin Fan then offers to sell her 2 pumpkins and a melon, leaving the woman very confused. He then notices something interesting in the corner of the room. The young man sees a very stylish sword hanging on the wall as decoration. The woman explains that it's a game replica belonging to her husband and offers the sword to him for protection. The protagonist happily accepts the gift, and the woman says he needs it more than they do. He says goodbye, and the little girl asks if that man is weird, but her mother says maybe they're the weird ones. Once outside, he admires his new Frostmourne sword and says it's going to be great for slicing up zombies. Suddenly, someone screams, and a woman is thrown from the top of a building. The woman lands hard right in front of the protagonist. On the balcony, a man complains that the woman still dared to resist even after getting beaten so badly. The guy then lights a cigarette and laments losing a high-quality girl. Lin Fan looks at her body and realizes she suffered a lot in her past life, and her look of despair reminds him of how his father looked when his mother left him. He then asks the man on the balcony why he did something like that. The chubby guy is surprised and wonders if there are no more zombies around, since the kid had the guts to shout. He then boasts that the building is his territory and that he does whatever he wants with the women. Our hero decides he needs to act, or the mother and daughter he met will also be in danger. He picks the woman up in his arms and says he's taking her to the 5th floor. The guy on the balcony starts mocking him and calls him a loser. Then he tells him to get lost before he loses his patience and comes down to handle things. After that, he goes back inside complaining about the bad luck of running into idiots at the end of the world, and reflects that in the apocalypse he can do whatever he wants, and he finds this freedom amazing. Suddenly, he hears someone knocking on his door and gets scared. The chubby guy grabs a baseball bat and goes to the door, wondering if it's a zombie. He then complains that if there are zombies in the hallway, he won't be able to look for more girls. But when he looks through the peephole, he sees the face of the woman he threw from the building. The guy gets so scared he falls backward, not understanding what's happening. Outside, it was our hero using the woman's hand to knock on the door and tell him to open up. The attacker is relieved to see it was just the protagonist and tells him to go away. With a wicked smile, he thinks about screaming to attract zombies and get rid of the guy. But before he can do anything, the protagonist smashes the door down with his bare hands. The fat guy is shocked, wondering how the kid broke a reinforced door and asks if he's even human. Lin Fan enters the apartment and sees various bizarre pieces of equipment the guy used to torture the woman. The attacker angrily yells at him to get out and not to bring a body into his house. But completely furious, the protagonist says he brought her to see what would happen. The scene then cuts to a police station. Gagged and tied up, the chubby guy panics, tries to escape, and asks what our protagonist is trying to do. Lin Fan drags him down the street and says that bringing a criminal to justice is the most normal thing in the world. but the fat guy screams that he should know how to act in an apocalypse and not just do whatever he wants. Our hero then slaps him, calling him a moron for not knowing the difference between fiction and reality. And without any ceremony, he throws the attacker on the ground right in front of the police station. The guy complains of the pain and wonders how the kid broke a door and still sent him flying with a single slap. He screams that it's pointless since there's no one there to judge him because the world is over. However, Lin Fan smiles and says he's wrong, and that there is someone. The chubby guy is terrified when he realizes there are several people in the police station. Suddenly, several zombie police officers appear and attack the man. The next day, at the city library, a group is preparing to enter the building. One of the men in the armored car asks Old Lee to wait for them and to be careful. A woman reminds the group that their goal is to find medical books and tells them not to get distracted. When they get to the door, one of the guys celebrates because it seems there are no zombies inside, but the group's leader cuts him off and tells them to wait before going in. Carefully, she then opens the door using a small knife. One of the men confirms that it's all clear, but the other says the boss is being way too cautious. She ignores the comments and tells them to hurry up and look for the medical books. But suddenly, our hero appears and greets the group. Everyone is startled, and one of them yells, wondering how a zombie can talk. The protagonist introduces himself as a human, and the group's leader asks what he's doing there. With a book on vegetable farming in his hand, he says he's obviously reading. One of the guys whispers to the boss that her question was kind of pointless, but she tells him to shut up. The woman then apologizes for the disturbance, and the young man just asks them to be quiet. As Lin Fan walks away, the group starts to question if he's some kind of psycho. The leader agrees that he's dangerous and decides it's best to avoid him. She says she has a bad feeling about him and hurries her men to grab the books and leave. The group then starts searching for the medical books on the library shelves. But suddenly the protagonist interrupts them and tells them to wait. The woman gets tense, wondering what he wants with them, and prepares for the worst. He then explains that they need to check out all the books they're taking as they are library property. The group is completely stunned and wonders what asylum that guy escaped from. The leader tries to argue, saying he's crazy and that the world is in chaos outside. But Lin Fan calmly says he knows about the apocalypse, but other than that, nothing has changed. The woman gets even more confused and asks if he's sure about what he's saying. One of the men tries to make the protagonist understand the gravity of the situation but gives up and suggests they each mind their own business. Our hero then brags about his strength and says if they're in danger, they can look for him. The group is left speechless by his audacity. They thank him and run off, thinking the guy is definitely nuts. Lin Fan is confused by their reaction and complains that they didn't even ask for his name. He then goes back to reading and decides to study agriculture to become self-sufficient. In an underground base, a scientist discovers that the cellular activity of the zombies is increasing. Another scientist asks if this means the zombies are evolving. A superior wants to know if they can develop an antibody for the virus, but the answer is no. The chief then asks the scientist if he is familiar with zombie genes. Back to the protagonist, he finds a perfect open space to start his farm. He then gets ready to start working on his new garden. First, Lin Fan yells, asking if anyone's around and if anyone objects to him making a vegetable garden. The noise from his shout ended up attracting several zombies, and zombies start pouring in from all directions. But he's not intimidated, and with his sword readies himself for battle, and he eliminates them all with ease. Now he thinks he doesn't have to worry about zombies anymore while he's planting. Looking at the bodies on the ground, he concludes that there's no one else alive around there. But his stomach starts to rumble, and he decides to eat something before starting work. He then goes to the mother and daughter's apartment and shares his food with them. The woman thanks him and says she doesn't want to abuse his kindness, but says she's worried about her daughter's future. The protagonist then asks if she needs help with anything. The woman is surprised at how easily he agreed to help. A little embarrassed, she asks if she can go with him, taking her daughter along. Lin Fan then offers to help her move to his neighborhood, which is safe and cheap. The woman is completely lost, wondering if they're talking about the same thing. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, a group of survivors is gathered, and suddenly one of their cell phones rings and he wonders if it's the rescue team. But on the other end of the line was our protagonist, asking if his house was still for rent. The man gets furious and hangs up on him, thinking it's some kind of joke. He then reflects on how the apocalypse came out of nowhere and how there's no sign of rescue. But suddenly his phone rings again, and it's the same guy from before. The man explodes with rage and yells, telling the guy to get lost. The call drops, but not because he hung up, but because of a low battery. Lin Fan comments on people's temper these days and decides to call again. He insists he just wants to rent the house and doesn't understand why the guy is so mad. Out of patience, the man yells that he'll rent the house and tells the protagonist to meet him on the roof. Our hero celebrates that the guy agreed and tells the mother and daughter to wait, that he'll be right back. He then leaves the apartment and the woman doesn't even have time to react. On the roof, the man's brother asks what happened and he replies it was just some idiot. Chen's brother calls him over to talk about something serious. He explains that the supplies they have will only last for half a month and suggests they get rid of the 4 elderly people in the group to save food. And he says that after the old folks, they'll get rid of the other men and the ugly women. The women in the group feel uncomfortable with their stares. They then agree to keep the pretty women around to have fun with. Meanwhile, our hero is biking through the city with a horde of zombies chasing him. A group of survivors sees the scene, and one of them wonders who that lunatic is, and the other doubts he'll get very far on a bike. Lin Fan arrives at his destination and realizes the neighborhood is very luxurious. He looks back and sees that he finally managed to shake the horde of zombies. Back on the roof, the group's leader gives a speech to the other survivors. The elderly members of the group watch the scene from a distance with sad expressions. The retired soldier and his wife, a military doctor, accept their fate and decide to leave what little hope there is for the younger ones. Another elderly man, a retired military engineer, seems to have already accepted what's going to happen. The soldier asks the engineer if he feels the same, and he agrees. Another elderly couple, a retired professor and his wife, also accept their fate with dignity. The group leader congratulates his brother for convincing the others so quickly, but the brother reveals his plan to get rid of everyone and keep the supplies and the women for themselves. Suddenly, one of the elderly men reveals that they heard the whole plan, and the two are surprised. The retired soldier says they don't need to worry, and that they will go home to await their end. But the other survivors panic and demand they be thrown from the building. Suddenly, someone knocks on the rooftop door and asks if Mr. Chen is there. It was Lin Fan, who introduces himself as the guy who called to rent the apartment. Chen gets annoyed and yells at him, but our protagonist doesn't seem to care. With one kick, our hero easily smashes the door down. And he apologizes, saying he didn't know the door was so flimsy. Chen's brother whispers a plan to use the protagonist to get rid of the zombies. Chen agrees with the plan, thinking it's a brilliant idea. The protagonist then asks who Mr. Chen is, and he tells him to get lost, saying the place is already his. Ignoring the situation, he offers 5,000 as an advance payment, leaving Chen shocked. The group leader takes the money and tells the protagonist to leave quickly. Our hero thanks him and turns to leave, but suddenly stops. He then addresses one of the elderly men, calling him by name, and the man is surprised. Lin Fan says he recognized him from TV and calls him a hero for his work in weapons technology. He then asks why the elderly are trying to leave the rooftop, which is dangerous. The elderly explain that they are old and prefer to leave the supplies for the younger generation. With a determined look, our hero faces the group of survivors. Chen and his brother feel a chill from the young man's gaze and realize he's dangerous. The protagonist invites the elderly to go with him, guaranteeing he has the strength to protect them. He insists he's strong enough and that he can find a place for them to stay. The elderly are moved by the protagonist's kindness and say he really has something special. Not taking no for an answer, our hero takes the elderly by the hand and leads them away. Chen's brother tries to stop him but is held back by the leader. Chen is confused, and his brother explains that they'll keep things as they were. With a wicked smile, Chen's brother reveals his plan to use the group as bait for the zombies. Lin Fan descends from the building with the elderly, and potted plants start being thrown at them. He then looks up at the roof of the building and realizes the group of survivors is throwing potted plants to attract the zombies. The elderly are horrified by the cruelty of the young people, but Lin Fan remains calm. The retired soldier says the group wants to use them as bait for the zombies. The engineer notices something strange and asks if the others noticed it too. He points to the pile of zombie bodies on the street and wonders how that happened. They start to suspect that it might be our protagonist's doing. Lin Fan smiles and explains that he had no choice but to defeat the zombies to get to the roof. The elderly are completely shocked to learn that he single-handedly defeated the entire horde. On the roof, the survivors wonder why there's no sound of zombies downstairs. The group leader gets annoyed with the talk and goes to the edge to see what's happening. He turns pale when he sees the pile of zombie bodies and realizes Lin Fan was telling the truth. Suddenly, Chen's brother tries to throw one of the group members off the roof. He turns to the others and asks why everyone is looking at him like that. With an evil look, he says that since objects don't work, they'll use the smell of flesh and blood. Chen praises his brother's intelligence and congratulates him on the brilliant plan. Suddenly, the guy's body falls to the ground, surprising the protagonist group. Right after, several zombies appear, running in their direction, and the group of survivors celebrates that the plan worked and that the zombies have been attracted. The elderly panic when they see the zombies approaching and wonder what they're going to do. The protagonist asks the soldier if he has a car, and he says he does. Lin Fan says his bike can't carry so many people, so he tells the soldier to drive to the place he mentioned and runs off to take care of the zombies. The elderly try to stop him, offering to fight the zombies in his place. But one of them realizes that our protagonist is not ordinary, and that the best way to help is to not get in the way. Lin Fan stops in front of the zombies and complains about their pathetic resistance, and says he's been waiting an eternity for them. On the roof, the group leader finds it strange that the protagonist is going to the gate alone, but his brother thinks he's scared. Suddenly, Chen is shocked and says his brother was right because the protagonist opened the gate by himself. They then see the boy running, and Chen's brother says it's just his survival instinct kicking in. However, Chen's brother notices something strange and notes the direction he's running. The two are terrified when they realize the protagonist is luring the horde of zombies directly to them. The horde of zombies then invades the building, running frantically to the top floor. Lin Fan arrives back on the roof and faces the group of survivors, and they ask what the protagonist is doing. With a smile, he says he was just being helpful and brought the zombies they wanted so badly. Then, the monsters invade the rooftop, ready to devour everyone in their path. The group of survivors panics and starts screaming desperately.